joining us tonight. Our guest tonight is April Byran. She's the Exhibits and Interpretation Manager at the Air Zoo Aerospace and Science Center. And she graduated with a BA in Public History from Western Michigan University and an MA in Museum Studies from the George Washington University. She sought her public degree, history degree, because she believes in finding and telling stories about all kinds of people from all sorts of backgrounds. She is grateful for the chance to be able to tell the local and national stories of the Air Zoo co-founder Sue Parish and her beloved P40D Warhawk, dressed in the iconic pink livery. And she draws daily inspiration from Sue's strength, tenacity, and imagination. She even adds cumin to her spaghetti sauce these days because she learned it from Sue's own recipe book.
That's right.
But I'll let you take it away, April. I'm very interested in learning all about Sue.
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me to share Sue's story and to shed some light on how it is she came to put together her beloved P40. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. I am happy to jump right in. Sue would be quite pleased because this woman right here, she's a museum co-founder, P40 owner, pilot, the mom, born in New York. So I think she would be as tickled as can be to know that we were having this conversation tonight. And it really is my pleasure to talk about Sue. When I say she inspires me, I mean it. Just last week, I rented a car and I'd never driven a car without a key to put into the ignition. It was a push ignition. And at first I got scared, and then I thought, April, think about Sue. What would Sue do? Sue was incredibly tenacious and bold, and she believed there's nothing she couldn't do. So I said, just try it. And I drove that car all the way to Florida and back nice and safely. So Sue is every day an inspiration to me. So yes, let's jump right in. I'd like to just give you a short agenda about what we'll explore tonight. I'll give you an introduction to Sue Parish and answer the question, why a P40? What was it that interested her about the P40? We'll look a little bit at her means of acquiring and restoring her beloved airplane. And of course, we'll look at her flying and showing her P40. And then we'll talk about her giving a big pink gift to generations. So just getting to know our dear Susie, Suzanne Upjohn Delano. She was born November 13th, 1922 in New York City, born right there during the golden age of flight. And that will absolutely have an impact on her as she grows up. So I want to start by sharing this quote from Susie. I answer to Sue or Susie, but not Suzanne. If I'm called Suzanne, I know I'm in trouble. So it's likely that you will not hear me refer to her as Suzanne during our chat together tonight. I tend to call her Sue and Susie too, because that's what she would have liked. So when you heard me say her name, you may have heard Upjohn and wondered, is that the pharmaceutical company connection? Yes, indeed. Dr. William E. Upjohn, founder of Upjohn Company, went around town here in Kalamazoo as W.E., but to Sue, he was grandpa. So Upjohn is Susie's grandfather. And we're real proud of his heritage here in Kalamazoo. And that was a big part of Sue's upbringing. You see here a photograph of her mama, Dorothy. And there's Sue with a very short, dark haircut with her sister and her brother. They were living in New York City when Sue's mom and dad got divorced. And Grandpa Upjohn said, I'm really missing you. Would you please come back to Kalamazoo? Come to Kalamazoo, bring the kids. I'd love to have you home. And Dorothy said, no, I've got to be here in New York. I'm an actress and I want to hone my craft here in New York. And so Grandpa's first few attempts to get the family home failed, but finally he succeeded. In 1927, he appealed to Dorothy's fancy for the theater and made her a deal she couldn't resist. He said, move to Kalamazoo and I'll build you a theater. And that theater became our local civic theater, which is still very much beloved and in use today. And later on in her life, Sue would end up on stage at the Civic Theater. She grew up in Kalamazoo and she learned to ride horses at about age 3. We understand that I think second or third grade, she was so boy crazy that she failed that year of school. She flunked out because she was thinking more about her boyfriend than her studies. But she would definitely become more focused as time went by, and her focus led her to really uh, gain an acumen as an avid horseback rider, and she won many trophies. Beside the aircraft, aviation, racing trophies we have in the collection for Sue, we have many trophies like this, a 1941 riding trophy. So, how does a young woman in love with horseback riding become a pilot? So here's Sue with her dear horse, Montana. And one day, while training Montana, Sue and Montana went to jump, but Montana came down hard, threw Sue off of her back, and Sue ended up fracturing her ankle. And her doctor said, sorry, no horseback riding for 6 weeks. Sue sat at home with her crutches and she kind of began getting on her mother's nerves. And so her mom gave Sue a suggestion that changed her life and finds me speaking with you tonight. Mom became so frustrated with my hanging around the house, Sue said, that one day she spouted, Sue, dear, you know, your cousin Dick Light flies. Why don't you go out to the airport and take a few lessons till you can ride again? Out I went to Austin Lake for my first lesson. Well, horses, as my only endeavor, quickly went out the window, and flying became my new interest. And when Sue put her mind to something, oh, she did it up. So she ended up getting her pilot's license, private license, became a part of the Civil Air Patrol. And when she heard about an experimental program during World War II, helping to fill the critical combat pilot shortage, filling the traditional male roles of ferrying aircraft, of training pilots, Sue jumped in. It took a moment because she wasn't quite old enough yet to be a part of the Women Air Force Service pilots. And many times she got in touch with Jackie Cochran, one of the directors of the program, and said, please, please let me in. One time Jackie said, you're too young, don't contact me again. But I mentioned Sue's tenacity. She kept at it. And so Jackie finally said, if you can pass your physical by your 21st birthday, I'll save you a spot. And Sue did it. She got into the WASP, which is fantastic. In our collection, we have some of her WASP related artifacts and archival pieces. Here's just a little look at her steno pad where she took her class notes while she was training during the WASP. And she was part of graduating class 44 W6, which means the WASP, the W is for WASP or women. 44, that's the year that she was part of it. And 6, she was the 6th graduating class of 1944. These amazing women, about 20,000 women across America applied, but only 1,742, I believe, graduated. And of that over 1,000 women, they went to air bases across America and they flew 60 million domestic miles. 60 million. They weren't able to fly overseas. They didn't ferry aircraft across the water, but they flew all over America. Sue was at Byran Army Air Force Base down in Texas while she was with the WASP. And she had some high level training that she did there. Her commanding officer didn't think she could hack it, but she did all right. And here Sue has a little bit to say about what it cost to be a WASP. As a group, we flew 60 million miles of operation flights. We earned $150 a month while in training and $250 a month after graduation, but had to pay for our own food, uniforms, and lodging. Our work was not without risk. 38 WASP trainees and graduates lost their lives in service to their country during the war. So the WASP were considered volunteers. It was Christmas time, December 20th, 1944, when Jackie called all the WASP to come and sit down, have a seat. And Sue says she remembers sitting down on the floor, kind of crisscross applesauce, as they say, thinking that this was going to be maybe an announcement about a Christmas party or some holiday fun. But sadly, the news was that the program had been deactivated. And the WASP were disappointed. They were sad, but they were very proud of what they had accomplished and how they had helped America to do what it was able to do and send those combat pilots overseas. Because the WASP were volunteers, they were made to pay for their own way home. But I haven't heard one in any of the memoirs I've read, the books I've read, I haven't heard one complaint about that. They were really just very proud to do what they did. So after WASP service, women went on to do many things. Some went back to school, some got married, some went into military related aviation roles, not as pilots, but doing many things until someday they could become pilots. And that's what Sue wanted to be. And you see this big stack of rejection letters. We have a big box of them, and they're all for Sue. She wanted to fly commercially, but companies such as TWA wrote her back saying, hey, wow, you sound great. Super record, great safety record, but we do not employ other than men pilots. Eastern Airlines, I don't know if it was tongue in cheek or seriously, when they wrote, had you been born a boy, oh, imagine receiving that. Sue hand wrote, she typed a letter back to each and every one of these airlines saying, thank you. Thank you for considering me. I'm just going to keep trying until I can fly commercially. But that wasn't to be, because it just wouldn't take place until the 1970s. So in the meantime, Susie married a terrific man named Preston Pete Parish, and they met in 1947, and a year later they walked down the aisle. So you'll see a little bit of pink throughout this presentation. You're definitely going to see some pink when we get to looking at pictures of Sue's P40. Sue loved pink, and we can't see it here in this black and white photo, but her wedding dress, pink satin. So I mentioned when Susie did something, she really put her heart into it. And so in order to be a great chef or great cook for her new husband, she attended the Le Cordon Bleu School of Cuisine in New York. We love it. We only recently found her recipe book. You see it pictured here. She had handwritten recipes that she took during her class notes, and then she'd go home and type them up. So we have them to this day. And that is why, indeed, I put cumin in my spaghetti sauce. I think she learned it there. And so I do it too. We're getting ready to have a Susie recipe night where we're all going to make her recipes and then bring them to work and taste and explore and enjoy the kind of cooking that Sue did. I think that if she didn't go into being a co-founder and curator of a museum, she might have written a cookbook and been another Julia Child. What kept her busy during the 50s and 60s and into the 70s? I was raising a family of 5 children. And by 1969, Sue and Pete had 5 teenagers at home. But just about a decade before that, they were itching a little bit. So I need to tell you about Mr. Preston Pete Parish very quickly. Pete was a veteran. He had been with the First Marines at Guadalcanal and Peleliu. He didn't have the opportunity to fly during World War II because his best friend, Peter, washed out of flying lessons, of his pilot lessons, and Pete didn't want to hurt his best buddy. And so he didn't pursue his wings. But one night during the bombardment at Guadalcanal, Pete's best friend lost his life. And Pete felt so devastated. He said, I need to find some way to protect myself. And I want to do that in the cockpit of a Wildcat. I want to fly. And so a little bit later in his career, in during World War II, he sought his flying lessons and his pilot license. Unfortunately, he didn't earn them before the war was over, but he'd get them later on in an honorary way. So these two veterans who loved to fly, they were without a cockpit for quite some time until 1959, when Pete came home one night. He said, "Hun, I hope you won't be angry with me, but I own half an airplane." It was the day that he bought half of an interest in a Bonanza N-35. He worked at the Upjohn Company, and a few guys got together and they bought an airplane. And at first, Sue said, what did you do? Why did you do this? If we're going to get back into flying, Pete, we've got to study. We've got a lot of work to do. But yeah, once he did that, as Sue said, I couldn't get back in a plane fast enough. And they will begin at this point to collect. And that's where Sue is going to wind up with a P40. So she begins racing the family Bonanza. And at first, newspaper articles are calling her Mrs. Preston Pete Parish. That'll change eventually. She'll be known just as Sue Parish, but early during her Powder Puff Derby days, she was known as Mrs. Preston Pete Parish. And there she is. She's winning, and that's where the trophies begin to pile up. She loves it. She gets such a kick out of it. But she's going to want her own airplane. Here's her 1963 Pilot of the Year, the Michigan Small Trophy. We've got, like I say, we've got a couple of those in the collection. But what Sue really wanted was to fly an aircraft that she hadn't had the chance to fly during her WASP service. The first aircraft that Pete and Sue acquired was a Boeing Stearman Cadet. They loved that airplane. The second would be a Texan, and that was one of the aircraft that Sue and all the WASP trained in and then ferried. And so Sue was very comfortable with that aircraft, but she wanted a fighter. And so this is where she meets a gentleman named Frank Sanders. And I want to read you what I found. A very interesting little story about how she ends up with this P40, which you see in a parade in Coachella, California. So when the time came to purchase her own aircraft, and the one that she's going to choose, not a birthday present or a Christmas present like the Texan, but she is going to choose the airplane. She had her eyes on acquiring a fighter and a gentleman named Frank Sanders, whose opinion garnered great respect, according to Sue, recommended a P40 for sale down in Edison, Texas. She met Frank in Edison to look over the aircraft. It was in pieces and partly in a box at that time. Frank found the P40 to be in good condition, and he felt that it wouldn't be too tough to find two missing parts. They needed a propeller and a spinner. And so Sue said yes. We have some great photographs in the collection. And at first, because they didn't have any writing on them, there was no information to go along with them. I couldn't quite figure out, what is Sue doing in California? What is this adventure that she's going on with her trusty station wagon? What was she doing there? Now we understand. She's searching for the propeller and spinner. She needs these pieces. She needs pieces for her P40 so Frank can work on it. Frank planned to truck the P40 up to his hangar in Long Beach, California, and he hauled it up to Long Beach in 1972. And by January 1973, Frank launched the restoration work. This was a really exciting time for Sue. 3 years later, by the spring of 1976, Sue's growing really anxious. In fact, even before that, she has joined the P40 Pilots Association, Warhawk Association. She's really getting excited about this. But it just seems to be taking a bit of time. 3 years is driving her nuts. She made frequent trips from Hickory Farms, Hickory Farms, Hickory Corners, right here in Kalamazoo. She flew commercially to visit Frank and her new aircraft to see how it was coming along. One day in 1976, her husband Pete told her, next time you visit, don't come home until you return flying the P40. This is one of my favorite pictures of Sue Parish. How many women in the 70s can we really say are excited to sit in the back of their car holding these steel, these aluminum, these airplane parts? Look at the smile on her face. That is pure joy. She absolutely loved the adventure of putting this aircraft back together. And then, wow, what she'll end up doing with it. Simply amazing. So, what's going to happen? She's going to need some specialized training to fly the P40. She flew with a pilot named Gary Mermans, who served as the chief test pilot for United Airlines. She sat in the back seat to help prepare her to fly because she was unable to see straight ahead. I can see less from the back seat of an AT6 than from the P40, actually, Sue said. It gives you very good practice for the P40. And they use that for a training plane whenever graduating somebody during the WASP into a fighter plane of the old type. Frank accompanied Sue home in the still unpainted P40. And as the pilots approached Kalamazoo, Sue could see a large thunderstorm overhead. The tower verified the storm, and Sue replied that she would bypass Kalamazoo and fly over Gun Lake, which isn't too far from us first. And then she'd come out over Gull Lake. But by the time they came over Kalamazoo Municipal Airport, which is, if I were to throw my water bottle, I would hit the airport. That's how close it is. They found it safe to make a landing. So Sue recalled the tower's excitement. Wow, in 1976 to see a P40 there. And who knew how often the tower would have that pleasure in the future? They would be able to see that a few more times, which is really great. So I'm going to show you some images of just Sue during this time. As I mentioned, while she's waiting for the restoration to be completed, she became part of the P40 Warhawk Pilots Association. So here's a photograph in 1974. That looks a heck of a lot like her plane. But could they have all gone to visit it? I just don't know. I don't know about this photograph. What was fun to find in her collection was this program for the 4th annual reunion of the association, and to see that she was vice president at the time. That's really great. They had met at this time in North Dayton, Ohio at the Imperial House. Also in her collection, we find a bit of ephemera related to what she had done for the aircraft. So here we've got her Allison engine with a part number dated September of 1976, and we see all the work that had been done on it. A lot of words, phrases that I don't know anything about, but it's really neat to see just how well she kept documentation, how well she kept her records, because we still have them today. And this gave me the opportunity to get a good timeline of how things came along. So here we are, our dear Parish in pink. People said the P40 was the most ladylike plane, but it was fast, Sue said. So yes, her restoration was completed in 1976. So how does a woman who loves pink have the opportunity to paint a P40 pink? She worked with the Smithsonian and did some research, and she found out that aircraft, the Warhawks flying in Africa um, during World War II, they were painted a certain color. The actual color of the pink, let's see, it's called Sand 26. After sun exposure in the desert, the pink pigment became dominant. The 57th flew the Warhawks over the Pacific from 42 to 43, and photographs and some suggestions gave the Smithsonian the confidence to say, yes, Sue, you may paint your airplane pink. And she did. At first, she was teased for it a little bit. Some said, nobody is going to take you seriously flying this. Oh, they were wrong. We also know that they use azure. Am I saying that right? Azure blue. That's the standard underside color for aircraft stationed in North Africa. And so we have the same thing on her plane, and it's really charming to look up. It is hanging in our lobby in our atrium, and it's just beautiful to look up and see the underbelly of this beautiful aircraft. So we'll take a look at the painting, a little bit about her livery. And one of the most important elements that we'll find on her P40 is Fifinella. Fifinella was created by the Walt Disney Company during World War II. Disney, while they wanted to do a lot to contribute during the war, and while they had sent some of their animators to the war, they were also creating a lot of insignia. And originally, Walt and Company had drawn Fifi for a Roald Dahl book called Gremlins that they were going to adapt into a movie. I don't know how it happened, but somebody knew somebody who knew somebody who knew a sister who had a sister in the Wasp and asked Walt Disney if he would donate Fifi to the Wasp as their mascot. So Walt added flying goggles and flying boots to Fifinella, and she became the Wasp. Very dear, very dear mascot. So if it belongs to Sue Parish, whether it's an airplane or a flight bag or a helmet or a flight suit, you can bet it'll have a Fifinella on it. There you see it right there. So there's our sweet Sue sitting in her P40, and there's Fifinella right there. We'll have a look at the flying tiger paint scheme face. So we're not seeing double here. Sue's also standing with her mentor, which she had painted in a similar way. Let's take a look at the eyes. So you notice the eyes, they actually were painted to resemble Sue's own eyes. They're very much the color of Sue's eyes. And I'm not so sure that the flying tiger, the original flying tiger that we know so well, had those super eyelashes. I'm not sure about that. Take a look at the shark's teeth, the lips. Yes, that's lipstick, beautiful lip color around there. One of the reasons makeup was important to Sue is because I'd mentioned Jackie Cochran earlier. Jackie, one of the directors of the Women Air Force Service Pilots, the reason that she had learned to fly to begin with was because she owned a cosmetics company, and she wanted to be able to take her makeup all over, anywhere she wanted to sell it. So when she spoke to her wasp, she'd say, in the cockpit, you're a pilot. But when you open that door, you climb out. When you climb out of the cockpit, you're a woman. I want you wearing makeup. I want you to look your best. And that stayed with Sue. In fact, I found a container that family members had brought in. They had just opened a couple of her desk drawers after she'd passed away, brought some things that had been at her work desk. And I was delighted to find peach and pink lipstick in that box, a little pink mirror that I'm sure she would pull out when people came to visit the Air Zoo. So it's no surprise that her aircraft had the makeup, and in her P40, she had a pink naugahyde makeup bag that our restoration manager had to make for her overnight. One night, she called him and said, Greg, really quickly, use that same naugahyde that you used to make my parachute and my flight bag. I need a makeup bag to go with me on this trip. We all think that's pretty adorable. Sue and Pete begin really getting involved in shows, going to air shows, competing. And I've mentioned before, and I'll say it again, our shelves are filled with their trophies. They were going to Oshkosh, bringing home some real honors. And our museum today, you come to the Air Zoo, you're going to see beautiful restored warbirds just sitting, resting, as we want them to be now. But when we opened our museum in 79, and for many years after that, we were flying those aircraft. And that was a bit unusual. Some museum professionals out there shook their heads. I'll admit, when I first arrived 7 years ago, I thought, what? What were they doing? But it made us really kind of different. And it gave people a chance to see and smell the history, which really impacted a lot of people that work at the Air Zoo today. I mentioned the Smithsonian, that Sue had turned to the Smithsonian for a little bit of help, little research. One of the things that they provided was this official pilot's checklist for her model, the P40N. And she had to be so excited to receive official this official checklist. So I would love to show a letter to you that when I found this in her collection, I had to scratch my head a little bit and giggle again, just wondering how many people just have something like this in their letter collection, in their correspondence. So a gentleman had found out, and he's from the Brigadoon Restaurant and Lounge. He had found out in the late 70s that Sue had what did she call it? What do they call it? Um, I've got to read this because these are throttle quadrants. Throttle quadrants, just not part of my everyday vernacular. Had never heard of them until I found this letter. So he's writing saying, somebody told me that you have some extra throttle quadrants. I just love that someone wrote to her about that. And Susie wrote back and she said, certainly. She wrote, this is a copy of her letter to Steve, saying, yes, let's make a deal, because she most definitely found a lot of parts while she was on her adventures of putting her P40 together. This is kind of a neat document that I've located too. Cal Aero Incorporated, they're still part of the airport today. Instead of working on aircraft and servicing, instead of work as a fixed-based operator, today they do instruction. But back in the 70s and 80s, they were our number one go-to for restoration and fixing aircraft. And I can see by some of the numbers that pop up in Sue's invoice collection, you had to have a little money. You just had to have a couple bucks in your pocket in order to make some of these things happen. But how neat to have Cal Aero's paperwork. And what's really great is people from Cal Aero in 1978 and 1979 began to migrate over to the Air Zoo, our museum. In fact, our first president and CEO came from Cal Aero. Here's Sue welcoming the Air Zoo's very first guests in November of 1979. This was our first look and feel when we opened, and we were quite known for having the cats. In fact, we had collected so many cats that we could boast, if you will, that we were the only museum, or the only museum flying all the Grumman cats at one time. And it was because we had so many aircraft that we had them at the airport in the 1970s. And somebody said, hey, if you open a museum, I will give you my Hellcat. And we did it. We opened a museum in 1979. What airplane graces the cover of the original brochure for the museum? Why? It's none other than Susie's P40. Such a great shot. And that's Sue inside. She's flying it. And there's a little description inside. And of course, it was the first. When you opened up the brochure, it was the first description. I'm proud of that. I'm sure Sue was too. Again, a little bit more maintenance records here. We see consistently the engine and an overhaul, making sure everything is safe. And once again, that is because she flew it. We were flying our aircraft. On almost any given day, you could go sit in the observation lounge and watch one of the warbirds fly over. Sue also she did flyovers at high schools for senior proms, and she took her Pink P40 all over, especially to Oshkosh. We were in the newspaper quite a lot. Sue was in the newspaper quite a lot. And we're fortunate because they had the foresight to save those newspaper articles. This is just a great picture. Here you have a chance to see, that's Pete standing behind Sue. Look how petite she is. But she had no problem. She had trouble seeing over the front of the airplane, but I have trouble seeing over the front of my car. She made it work. All the people that you see here were part of flying our aircraft every day. And 1984, here she is at Mackinac Island, upstate Michigan. She is on a horse because they don't allow cars up there. It's a completely Victorian island, but she was able to do a flyover. That was a very special time. She flew her Pink P40. She gave that ultimate honor by doing a flyby while there were Flying Tigers reunited there up at Mackinac. This is one of my favorite pictures of Sue. Just, I love it so. It was the, I believe, 60th anniversary, Pratt and Whitney. They had a big to do, big air show, a big event in 1985. And Sue flew her P40 there. Next to the P40, you see our P47 Thunderbolt. A lot of people love this airplane. Here's a little girl named Mindy in 1989. She wrote a letter. She says, "Dear Airplane," I love it. Not Dear Sue or Dear Air Zoo, but Dear Airplane. Airplane lady is beautiful. Thank you, Airplane, for show to lots of people. That touches my heart. And I'm sure that touched Susie's heart too. And I noticed that we have about 15 minutes. I want to make sure I leave some room for chat, room for questions. So I'll move a little quickly because I want you to see a few more of these pictures, but it's just a view of how Sue, she is in 1989. This is 10 years from her retirement. She's still very busy. A French magazine came and did a whole article about her. She was very proud of that. When she wasn't flying, this is what she wrote all around the airport, all around the air zoo. This was her means of getting around. And we've got that on display today upstairs. Here are a few of the artifacts that used to be a part of her everyday life. And yes, they're pink. That's her flight bag, parachute, helmet. And to just love this helmet. And you see Susie Q on there. The Q, that it was her smiley face. You'll find a lot of those in her pilot's logs. She would write about some great place that she flew, and she always mentioned the good soup. Oh, we had some really great potato soup at that restaurant. And then she'd do her curly Q. It's darling. She has both her P40 and her Mentor painted on here. So here is a moment, just one more time. Sue climbed into the cockpit. She's there with Bob Ellis. He's the one that we kind of stole from Cal Aero, our first president and CEO. Sue did a beautiful thing. She's going to retire. And instead of keeping her airplane where she could touch it, feel it, climb into it anytime she wanted, because she could have, she made the decision to allow us to erect it in our lobby. We built an atrium around it. She wanted to do that because she wanted for people of all ages for years to come in and see it and be inspired. And it happens every day. Every day I'm walking by and I see a little child walk in the door and point up and say, "Wow, airplane." And the conversations that are sparked when someone is just standing there and looking at that airplane, they're excellent. We can do a lot of teaching. So there it is. I understand that Walt Disney Company made the mannequin or the life form that you see in there. It really looks a lot like her. It's a really, really great rendition of Susie. So what happened after she hung up her keys, so to speak? Sue did as her mama did, and she got up on the stage at the Civic, and she went into theater. She also got the camera, and she took some photography lessons, and here she is. Somebody took a picture of Sue taking pictures. She had a great rest of her life. The WASP finally received veteran status. It took a lot of work and a long time. They worked really hard for it. And then in 2010, this is Nancy Pelosi giving Sue the Congressional Medal of Honor, which is the highest honor that Congress, that the government can bestow on a civilian. And her family could have this medal at home right now, but this medal is on exhibit at the Air Zoo. That's how much Sue loved the Air Zoo. That's how much she loved the WASP. That's how much her family respects her wishes, that we have this beautiful gold medal on display. And only 3 months after Sue was able to go to Washington, D.C. and receive those honors, she passed away. I love that her family chose this sweet picture of Sue in her flight suit with her famous cowboy hat decorated to feminize it with some flowers, and also giving a nod to her horseback riding days. Her legacy lives on in everything we do at the Air Zoo. We're we do a lot. There's a lot of, oh my gosh, we've got a fantastic education program, and that's touching lives. We have a restoration program that is continuing to save history. I could go on all night. Today, I have the honor of exhibiting her stories, telling her stories. Anytime I see somebody standing and looking at this uniform, even if I'm running late for a meeting, I'll stop and take the opportunity to share about this brave, cool, groovy lady that we're also very proud of. Look how tiny her little suit is. Guests often comment on it. And it's a great conversation starter to talk about her hat. And you see, I mentioned Fifi is on everything Sue had. Well, there's Fifi again. And how nice to be able to have this on display right alongside, right in front of her airplane. We also had the opportunity to tell the WASP story. So just a couple years ago, we made a new WASP story called Daughters of the Sky. And Sue's story is threaded throughout the national story. We've got a little pink ribbon and a pink fifanella so that you know when you see Sue's story. Well, when you see the pink, you know that's Sue's story. So we had a chance to tell her public history story, the local lens through this national story exhibit. I'll wrap up with this photo. I took this today just for you. How nice it is to have that airplane right there, and we've got a wayside that describes it. And few things please me more in my position than seeing families gathered around that label and pointing and discussing and talking. And so often I hear people say, "Wow, look at her. Who is she? Oh, she started this museum." Wow. A woman who loved Loved her P40. Thank you so much.